We spend too much time focusing on the deal makers, which don't get me wrong, I'm one of those too, but it's those operational professionals that truly make an investor money over the long term.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0 podcast that highlights the voices shaping our built environment, presented by Integrated Projects. I'm your host, Jose. Today, I'm sitting down with Will Curtis, founder and principal broker of Sabers Commercial Real Estate down in San Antonio. Will's path into business isn't usual. So he spent nearly 7 years in the Army's 1st Cavalry Division, keeping Apache helicopters in the air. Will, I assume any missed detail here was pretty life or death here. So I imagine now what you're doing. I think curious to hear how that relates to kind of your day to day. He spent the decades since bringing the exact maintenance crew discipline to commercial real estate with a hand in well over $1 billion in transactions. Will, thanks for joining me.
No, it was. I thank you so much for the invite and willing to bring me on the show to share our story and what we can talk about.
So you posted recently that owners lose more money on operations than rent. Unpack that for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're being a little provocative on that. It is social media, right? So you're trying to get a bit of a discussion, but I think a lot of times many owners, especially those that are newer investors, they don't think about operations as they go through the process. They buy into we're going to make money, we're going to go out there and invest it, and it's just going to be easy money. And I think a lot of times, for our newer investors, they don't think through, well, if I get the cheapest property management or I get the cheapest contract, that's more money for me. But they don't look at necessarily the long-term impacts of what does a cheap system do? Well, it makes my tenants unhappy. It doesn't do what we need to do. We got to maintain it more, or the tenants aren't happy, so they leave. So I think there's more to it than trying to make it very simple. And I think that's where a lot of, especially newer investors, sometimes by not paying attention to the operations or maybe having way too much trust in the operations professionals, really miss out on the incomes they could have. And maybe a smart investment now actually pays dividends long term.
It's May 29th, 2026. What are folks talking about today? Are we talking offices? Are we talking industrial? I peeped. Industrial actually seems to be having been overbuilt actually in some parts of Texas. What are folks looking for today?
Yeah, San Antonio has been interesting. We're in the worst industrial market we've ever been in, and that means we've slipped 4% on occupancy. So, it's not a huge change, even though it's on textbook, it's the first dip or real dip that we've had in the last several years, if not decades. But I think a lot of folks are still excited about industrial. I think even though it's overbuilt in our market, it's not drastically overbuilt, so there's still a lot of interest in the product. There's still a lot of folks that are still going for it. I think office is still the interesting one to look at. And I may be biased because I'm primarily an office broker and property and asset manager for the office side of things. The discussion still comes in. How are we making office profitable? Is it anybody going to come back to the office? What do we have to do to help tenants bring employees back to the office? And I think that's the fun and the interesting discussion that's still out there even today. Here we are, 6 years, past the start of COVID, is still out there lingering. And for what we do, we track something called the labor leverage ratio. And effectively what that does is it gives us a kind of a buyer's market or seller's market, but in employment. So do employees or employers have the upper hand in negotiation? And if you look at it nationally, we are right about the same place that we were pre-COVID, maybe leaning a little bit more to the employer side. And what we've noticed, at least on a national side, is that as this leverage ratio has leaned more towards employees, we've seen office vacancy increase. So there's a correlation there that employees don't want to come back to the office. And when they have the power, they're saying we don't want to come back. Some markets like San Antonio is much more employer friendly. So we're seeing more folks want to come back to the office. But in the same sense, our office market is relatively a smaller footprint. And if we look at that side in general, we're a smaller mom and pop regional type market, whereas Dallas or Houston is big corporations, big regional headquarters, and they have a very different challenge because that's nameless and faceless where, my employees, their kids go and play, baseball or cheerleading with my kids, and it's a very different relationship in a a smaller market like ours.
Right. Are you seeing any, once you kind of double click into the market itself, are you seeing any trends of particular segments going back to office faster, whether it's tech or legal or otherwise?
I think what we see who aren't going back in is obviously tech and those sort of things. Now, San Antonio is a little weird because our tech industry is heavy in cybersecurity. So if you're looking at cybersecurity, obviously you can't do all the secret school things that you need to do in cybersecurity from your kitchen counter, right? You're
Mm,
going into skiffs, you're going into secure rooms.
right.
You are very collaborative, and the environment that you built is very, what would you call it, secretive. It's very confidential. So while our tech outside of cybersecurity is kind of doing the same thing everybody else is, cybersecurity, which is one of our largest indicators in San Antonio, it's the largest industries in San Antonio, it's an in-person, role as well. Of course, things like medical research, those are typically done in person, which again, San Antonio has been lucky that that's one of our large employers as well. But even things on banking, creative, those are back in office for the most part, just given some of the regulatory environment. Really,
Mm,
the folks that we see kind of struggling is the small office entrepreneurs. Is it more profitable to go to the office, or can I still stay at home? And we have quite a
right.
bit of inventory right now that are that 1,000 to 1,500 square foot, 3 to 5 offices. It's great for, I mean, even like a firm like ours where we only need 3 or 5 offices. Do you stay at home or do you still go to the office? That we're selling real estate. So obviously, it makes sense for us to go to an office and show that the need's there, but that's not every company, right? We've got pest control companies that probably should be in an office, but they're still handling everything from at home. Small startups that are still working from home and doing the we work or the shared space conference room once or twice a week for a meeting.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little interesting because while you have industry trends, you also have a lot of trends based off of size of business, and at a certain point they're outgrowing what they can do at home, but it's still maybe a little outside of their reach of what they want to do, and these co-working spaces really are stepping in and helping. And I think WeWork would have absolutely killed it had they been in better financial position kind of going through the pandemic.
My read here is that startups, mid-sized companies, they're I think the idea of moving into a completely vacant space it seems a little bit overwhelming. Like my team, for example, rents out a little WeWork here in New York. We're mostly remote, so we just kind of use it
Mhm.
as a huddle space here. But my read here is that folks, this idea of like buying square footage, it seems a little bit out of date, and you really want to buy in some sort of like move-in ready space. I'm curious, what are the winning attributes? What are you telling commercial office landlords like to stand out from others? Like what's drawing folks back in?
So I think there's a few things. One, it's having your space cleaned up and ready to go for somebody to come in. So maybe not completely turnkey, not completely ready to go because every tenant comes in, no matter what you do, the next tenant hates whatever you did, right? But having a lot of it prep ready to go to where in 30 to 60 days you can clean it up, paint, new carpet, add a wall or two here or there. 30 to 60 days turnaround is a good aspect for them to be able to do it. A little more modular is what we're seeing as well. So can you come in with desk space? Can you move it around? It tends to be a little bit more idealistic, at least for what we're seeing in our market, and especially with our smaller spaces. They're coming in going, I've got 5 employees now, I've got 6 employees now. If I grow in the next, 2 or 3 years, I'm going to have 10 or 15. Does my office space still work with what I need, or do I have to get another space? I think there's some fear with that as well, is that are you outgrowing? And even for us in our business, that's our struggle right now is that, well, if we get a space, our struggle right now is if we get space, do we outgrow it? And how do we stay kind of modular in what we're building?
Has there been any innovation on the actual contract structure itself? Like, are we seeing shorter term leases made available? Like, what's the latest on that?
I think a lot of landlords are being smart about it, is what can we do? A lot of landlords are being a little more flexible in, hey, if we need to relocate you, we're happy to relocate you. A lot of times that was internal to a building. What we're starting to see now is that landlords are even kind of leaning in with, hey, we own 5 or 6 different buildings. If this one doesn't work, we're happy to move you over into one of our other buildings. So they're getting a little more creative where many of them would have done that already. Hey, you outgrew it. We want to keep you as a tenant. You're great.
Right.
Let's move you over to this building, 3 blocks down. That was always an understanding, but now we're starting to see it more as really an enticement. Hey, if it doesn't work, we have all this additional square footage. We can
Right.
move you elsewhere. So now you're not just picking a building, but you're starting to pick a landlord that has the ability to help you scale and grow.
Mm, But in terms of say traditional contract structures, whether it's 7-year leases, 10-year leases, whatever it might be, are landlords are still kind of hoping to hold on to some of those longer term leases as opposed to, say, some of the short term co working kind of agreements?
I think we've seen a little bit of both. Obviously, from a lending standpoint, the longer the lease, the more stable the property, the better the value is going to be. And that's the game that many office landlords have really been trying to figure out and win at, is that they're trying to keep their values as high. And that's even one of the things they're doing now, is that they've been doing it for the last several years, is that rather than saying, hey, let's cut the rate, they're giving a ton away in concessions. So while your base rate may be 30, 40, $50 a square foot, the effective rate is half of that because they're giving you a tenant improvement. They're giving you free rent. We had an assignment that we turned down. It was going to be out in Nebraska, where they want us to come in, build a team, go out there and actually lease a space. They're like, look, we're so desperate. We will give a year of free rent for a 5-year lease. And I was like, if you can't get a local team to do that, now I'm not going to say we'll jump in and do it. There's some things we do a little bit different than others, but if you can't get a local team with basically 20% free rent, there's a problem with that.
Right.
And we ultimately didn't take that assignment because even giving that much away while keeping the rent at the same, it wasn't attractive from us as a broker standpoint, but it tells us there's something going on deeper in that market as well.
Right. Are banks partly to blame for this? Like, in other words, like, landlords are still, I assume, benefiting from these longer term leases and thus like the loans. But I'm trying to kind of understand, like, what's the kind of root challenge for landlords. Of course, we want as long term commitments as possible, but is there something behind we're also missing here? Is it just that banks are still lending on pretty traditional terms?
I think there's some of that. I think that the key in with this, right, is that the value is the value, and they're in a loan. They've got to refinance that loan every, 5 to 7 years or so, depending on the loan terms. And if you look at, there's a stat earlier in the year. I don't know if I've seen an updated stat on this one, but at least as of kind of coming into 2026, the stat basically said that across all banks, roughly 60% of their in-house portfolio was made up of multifamily and office that had low DSCR, which means you had 60% of their portfolio in office or in multifamily that was barely making enough to pay the mortgage. So these are already troubled. They were already having some struggles there. So I think from the bank's perspective, they're still trying to keep a balanced portfolio. They're still trying to make sure they stay solvent. Of course, they got the Federal Reserve who's coming in and making requirements of them as well. We've seen inflation maybe getting a softer landing through all this. So they've been trying to balance all this. And I don't know if the banks can do much more than what they're doing now. Some banks are getting pretty creative on what they're doing, where now they're doing additional loans, almost mezzanine or bridge financing, but based off the individual versus the property. And it's gotten a little more flexible, but it still doesn't change the fact the building's worth what the building is, and there's still an outstanding loan that they may be rapidly upside down on.
What's your instinct specifically on office? Is the general, say, sentiment that if we hold on long enough that folks are going to come back to some sort of like pre-COVID normal, or is your instinct that maybe there is a new normal and maybe just like the way we even think about office buildings needs to be kind of rethought about, like, where are you landing there?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both. And I know what a cop out answer to give, right? But I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I think that office will come back. And I think the people that turn around and buy office today and hold it in 10 or 15 years, we're going to be like, wow, they were geniuses. I can't believe they saw what was on there, and then we're going to be interviewing them like we do Warren Buffett, everybody else, on why were you such a genius? Well, we bought at the bottom of the market. I mean, and it's that simple, right? The struggle right now at the bottom of the market is, do you have enough financial staying power to keep the property running, operating, paying the mortgage, all that? And I mean, for us personally, we would be in office, in the investment side, if we had the staying capital, if we knew that we could float that property in the next 3 to 5 years, we would be in it all day as well. We're just not necessarily in that position. I do think we will see a return to office. And outside of the brokerage work I do, I'm an adjunct professor at a university. So we have this discussion with the students every semester, is what does office look like? What does the office of the future look like? Now, mind you, I'm at a private higher end university where many of them want to have a traditional work experience. They're looking to go to a Goldman. They're looking to go to, one of these massive firms that are going to be in office. They want to learn, they want to grow because they realize there is a lot of value to that. Now, understanding that my students may not be the same as every other student out there, but I think there's a good core of this next generation that's entering the workforce, wants to be in the office, understand there's value to being in the office, understand there's value of getting to know the people in there because they're going to grow and build those relationships.
Yeah.
and much differently than how you can do via Zoom. It's the pop by the office real quick. So I think we're going to see more of that, but I don't know if we're going to see office the same way we've seen it, over the last, 30, 40, 50 years, where it's the center of the workplace. I think so many jobs now can be done remote. You travel, you really are all over the place. I, spend quite a bit of the year on the road. So even though we have an office, I'm sitting in a hotel room, having meetings, doing all those kind of things. That's part of the reason why I think when we first reached out for this podcast, I was like, yeah, we can do it in like 6 months. It wasn't that long, but it was a while because I was on the road and knew that wasn't the right backdrop, to do it. Let's wait till we get back into the office so that we can actually have a good backdrop and have a quality podcast for you. But I don't think we're unique. And as I travel and start talking to other people traveling, there's a lot of folks that are in kind of that same business that because their employees are all over, because hybrid work is such a valuable or a real option for many people, they're hiring elsewhere. So now, we're not paying New York City or LA or Seattle or Chicago wages. I could move to Boise, and make more money while I'm still making those Seattle wages, those LA wages. And I think that's part of what's going to change and shift as well, is that we may see a broader sense of wages. And I think that adds into the office discussion as well, is do we have people coming in or out of markets and where do we apply? And we jokingly were saying, well, let's see if I can live in San Antonio where the cost of living is a third. Let's go see if I can get hired by a New York company or somebody out in the Beltway who's going to pay, New York or Beltway prices. I'm going to live like a king. Maybe that's something we should be looking at.
Right. Talk to me about your own practice, your own business model here. So it's my understanding that you're both leading a brokerage as well as kind of consulting services. Correct me here, but how do you in this day and age, how do you stand out? How do you provide exceptional service to clients, in this space?
I think it's a lot of it comes down to systems, and this kind of comes from my military background as well. As we kind of jump in, I script everything that should happen as best you can, right? Obviously, once you meet the client, you can't direct them there, but at least from the inboarding, working through the process, we put the team together to go through it. And one of the things we're working on right now is now bringing in AI agents in to really start working that process even more, so that now, the boring stuff that my admin is doing that we could absolutely use her doing bigger productive things. An AI agent can do this. They can do the follow up. They can respond to the email faster than what she can. They can do a lot of these things much quicker. And that's where we're starting to kind of build that system and all that in place. I think that's a struggle for a lot of entrepreneurs because they're not systems geared. I expect, especially in kind of commercial real estate where most of us are salespeople, the systems don't make sense. We're just used to going out there, talking to folks, getting to know them, and then build a relationship and go from there. The system's never built. We're a little more built on how does that system run and operate? How do we entice that? And then for me, I hire a bunch of type A salespeople where I'm the back office nerd. How do I make this process better? And that's a lot of how we've kind of built this out. And I think that same mindset as we go into the consulting, whether we're consulting for, real estate organizations or with property owners of how they can build their system out even better. It's that organizational flow that I attribute a lot to my time in the Army.
How much do you attribute to, say, systems, and how much do you attribute to relationships? I think kind of an old adage, I think specifically in brokerage is that, kind of your what is it, the network is your net worth kind of approach.
Yeah, yeah.
In a new age of technology, is that shifting? I appreciate that it benefits some folks that have kind of been around, right? Like folks that just know everyone. How
Yeah.
how do you navigate that? And again, going back to like standing out, how do you work through giving yourself a competitive advantage as a business?
I think it goes down to being visible. And even if you're not everywhere, you got to feel like you're everywhere. So even in this new age where digital is absolutely out there, you still got to be in shaking hands, kissing babies, doing all the things you would do, building relationships. That's always going to be important. But I think we're able to nurture those relationships easier through things like social media and digital outreach. And to give away my entire secrets on some of it, there's not a meeting that isn't in my CRM. If it's somebody's birthday, I didn't remember their birthday, but
Right.
it's in the CRM. Hey, if I haven't talked to, and my best friend's the same way, if I haven't talked to him in like 6 months, or we try to make sure we get, lunch or dinner as we're both, parents and busy and all that, we try to make sure we schedule the time. It's not that I'm like, man, I haven't seen him in a while. It's, oh yeah, it popped up my CRM. I've got to maintain that relationship. So
Right.
As much as we can automate a lot of that and put in reminders, we're doing a lot of that. But I think a lot of times, again, with the digital aspect, we're on LinkedIn, we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're doing everything we can out there so that we're being seen and visible as much as possible. So even if you didn't see me, you saw me through these other mediums. So you still feel like you're connected. Where we've got referral partners I haven't talked to in years, but yet we go back and forth on social media or other digital formats.
You alluded to here that the importance of AI and some of the kind of change management that comes with it. What are you most excited about? Like what you mentioned kind of getting rid of some of the boring work to focus on some of the high leverage stuff, but in your own day to day, what's been the biggest impact, the biggest ROI for you?
Uh, I think a sparring partner. I mean, and that's probably not the normal answer we get, but I mean, I jokingly say that I only have two friends in my life. It's Claude and it's ChatGPT because I talk to them more than I talk to anybody else. I mean, not really. I mean, I
Yeah.
talk to my wife and the team more so, but for me, I ideate verbally. So I think out loud. And a lot of times what it was me in the truck driving, going to the next meeting, just talking through something in my head. I look like I'm a crazy person, I know. But what I've started to do now is now put it on, AI, whether chat or Claude, depending on what I'm working on, put it on the voice and just start downloading what's in my head. And then what are the action items? What are the things I need to do next? What would this look like? Let's spar back and forth. This is a good idea or a bad idea. And we've kind of put prompts in now for both Claude and Chat that push back on everything. You are playing the devil's advocate. What is not right? If this really is a right idea, let's run with it, but push back and challenge me on everything. And as we've kind of done that, we get rid of some of that bias. It still agrees quite a bit, but it gets rid of a lot of that bias. And then for us, even the idea of the AI backend system we're doing, it was a discussion with Claude. I was like, man, here are the pain points my team's having. Here's a pain points that I'm having. Here's what I wish I had. We could do this. We could do that. We bounce back and forth with all that. And then from there, I was like, look, build me out a 30, 60, 90-day plan of what I need to do. Give me step by step. Talk to me like I'm an idiot. Give me everything I need to do. And then Claude put it together, gave me the steps. You got to do these 43 things first, and then you do the next 87 things, and then go from there. And then we track a lot of this in Notion for kind of a task manager. And then from there, I have it all in Notion. So I know as I'm working through, okay, hey, I'm gonna start working on the AI project. Here we go. I'll start working on that marketing project. Here we go. I've got those steps that I know. So it wasn't a discussion I had 3 weeks ago, and then remembering it's all been encapsulated as best I can.
I resonate with this quite a bit. I think for me, speech to text has been like transformative. I'm
Oh
sure,
yeah.
like you, I've got 5 minutes between one meeting and the next, and the thought of just kind of like writing something down just to make sure you get back to it, especially in days where you're back to back to back. I know it's been that speech to text for me certainly has been
Oh
like
yeah.
life changer, life
Well,
changer.
I think that neat thing is going to be the next generation as they start adapting. So I've got two daughters, right? They're 8 and 5, and we almost got in trouble. The 8-year old starting to have the conversation of is Santa Claus real, right? So fair enough, it's about that age. Her friends are starting to know all that kind of stuff. So she asked me and my wife, and she's like, "Hey, is Santa real?" Like, well, what do you believe? Santa, you get presents. We don't want. She's about that age. But we don't want it to die yet as a parent. She turns around and she goes right to Siri. Hey Siri, is Santa Claus? And I'm like, give me that. And we're yanking the iPad from her. But I think that the kids now, I mean, it's every generation, but I think now the idea of speech to text, they can read and they can do some things here and there, but there's definitely things where they're like, I don't know how to spell this, and they'll turn around and put it on the voice and type it out, through there or speak it out and it picks up. And sometimes it's hilarious because it's not right. But we're starting to see that where even my daughters now will text me throughout the day and it's speech to text. Hey daddy, just thinking about you, or hey daddy, can we do blah 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 for dinner? But it's conversations where the 5-year old, she can't spell, fully yet, but yet these are full on conversations I'm having with her through all this. I can only imagine what this is going to look like as they progress, where we're using it. I can only imagine, 10 years from now when they're young adults or 15 years from now when they're young adults, what that technology is going to look like and how much better it's going to be.
And exactly, and having that be almost second nature to them. It's like, of course, like whereas we're so blown away given that we didn't have this just 12, 24 months ago. Talk to me about so as AI is advancing quickly, talk to me about the things that you believe won't change about the real estate industry. What's still going to be true about the brick and mortar? What's an attractive space to work from in 10, 20 years from now? What's your instinct?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's still always going to be a person to person interaction. I think that's going to be the core to it. As much as we can automate, as much as AI is going to do a lot for us, I do think that there's always going to be room for a person to person relationship. As good as AI gets, and as we hear stories about people wanting to marry their AI, and now they're talking about putting AI into, we'll just call it companionship robots, right? As we're starting to go that way to where you start really building a relationship, I think there's still going to be a premium on the person to person relationship. I was speaking at a conference a couple months back, and the host lady that was putting it on, she is very artistic. It was called Military Creator Concerts, all sorts of creators, both content creators and like physical like artists and that kind of stuff. And she's like, everything is so mass produced that her stuff gets a premium because it's handmade. And she was saying, in technology and advancement, yes, everything can be done through technology, but there's going to be a premium to, can I actually talk to somebody? Can I actually sit down and have coffee? Is that going to be the premium that's going to change? And I kind of want to say yes. I think that's where we're going to lead to, where if you get somebody in person, I mean, even now, a lot of emails, my admin's doing it. It's not really me. Automation is setting up a lot of the things we're doing. When you actually get me, when you actually get a person, that's I don't want to say a privilege, but I mean, it really is. It's going to be more of a privilege to get that person in person live. And I think that'll be the one thing that doesn't change. I think human nature is going to want us to do that. And whatever the working environment looks like, whether it's retail and how we shop, where we go to work, how we manufacture, I think there's still going to be some kind of human connection that's there. I think it's just evolutionally who we are, that we strive to have tribes, we strive to have, interpersonal relationships.
I love that. Lightning round.
Oh,
Your favorite building in San Antonio?
man, favorite one. I mean, I love the Frost Tower, which is our newest big skyscraper. They did an amazing job on that one. Definitely a beautiful building, beautifully done, true Class A building as well. But I'll be honest with you, there's some of the historic stuff that's out there. One of my favorite kind of landmark buildings, you want to call it, is some of the missions. So if you're familiar with San Antonio, everybody knows the Alamo. Alamo was one of 7 missions that were there. So there were several of the missions that are out there that are just, even though they're not as used like they used to be, still gorgeous buildings. If you look at Esperana and I'm blanking on the other one now, still a functioning church this many years later. Beautiful buildings, and just the historic aspect of those buildings just make it that much more, I don't know, enjoyable to know that despite technology changing, we're still using something that was built 150, 200 years ago.
Most underrated role in commercial real estate in your day to day?
I want to say property manager, but I might be biased on that one, right? Given that's where a good chunk of our business. I
Oh,
think the brokers get all the credit. They're the ones that make the business journal. They're, oh, hey, we built the building, or hey, we sold the building, or we bought the building. Those property managers, operational professionals, the one that actually make the building make money long term. They're the ones that are dealing with the day in, day out of making sure things happen. The tenants that are upset, they're the ones that truly create the value for the investor. And I think we spend too much time focusing on the deal makers, which don't get me wrong, I'm one of those too. But it's those operational professionals that truly make an investor money over the long term and have a much deeper relationship with that property and with the investor versus the sales team.
is there something, kind of the next big thing that you feel like in San Antonio no one seems to be talking about right now that's keeping you awake? Something that folks should be talking about more?
I think with San Antonio, the interesting thing is going to be is finally if we're going to redevelop our downtown the way we want. And if you're from San Antonio, this has been something that's been pretty controversial over the last several months. We got a new mayor. The mayor wasn't a fan of some of all this. The Spurs were putting in for basically revitalizing our downtown, which comes into our convention center, putting a baseball field, putting a new Spurs arena, revitalizing a lot of these things. Of course, now the Spurs are getting ready to go into game 7. They're going to beat Oklahoma, go on to win the NBA championship. At least that's what we're hoping for here locally. I think that changes the discussion because you have a lot of people coming in, a lot of people are traveling, and of course, Oklahoma City's not that far. So you have, I would say, a third of the fans in there, Oklahoma City, that are coming in. Tickets are sold out. Could you imagine bigger stadium, all that? So locally, we're talking about it a lot, but I think outside of San Antonio, most people think Alamo, Six Flags, SeaWorld, and that's about it, or military graduation. San Antonio's on the precipice of having a decade of true redevelopment of our downtown, which I think completely changes what we do, integrates the Riverwalk in a very different way. Now, even where they're much more talking about water taxis. So we're actually on the San Antonio River, on the Riverwalk, and the river, we call the River Reach. is actually going to be much larger. So what most people think of the Riverwalk as just being downtown, it's going to integrate places like the Pearl. It's going to integrate places like the Missions, where you could
Mm.
literally go park somewhere, take a boat taxi to whatever part of town you want to go to, and then park elsewhere. So to me, this transit and redevelopment of our downtown is going to be massively different. It's going to be huge for tourism, but it's also huge for attracting businesses in and creating a climate where younger professionals want to come and work, which has not always been the case. Austin is so much cooler than we are just up the road. But I think if you look at, what we're building, it's going to be that same thing. We're just, a decade or so away from it being done.
What would you tell to young Will coming out of college now? You're a professor now, so you're advising
Yeah.
your students, but folks wanting to get into real estate, whether again on the transactional side, property management side, you now having the benefit of hindsight, the experience. What should a young Will know?
I tell my students two things. One, while you're a student, one of the most valuable things you can do is say, "Hey, I'm Will. I'm a undergraduate student at Trinity or whatever university you're at. I'd love to have coffee with you. I'd love to learn more about what you do." Most professionals, if they have the time, are absolutely going to take that coffee meeting. They're going to take that phone call. They're going to do all that because they were there once as well. But many of them are also going like, "Hey, I'm going to have to hire somebody. Let me have this as a soft interview. Let me see if you're the next junior analyst, the next junior broker, the next new property manager, whatever the case happens to be." That is valuable. The moment you're like, "Hey, I'm Will with Cross Sabers," now you're competition. Even if you're interning with somebody else, they don't still see you as competition. You're still a student learning. So to me, that's one of the biggest things that you can do early on is jump in and go for it. The other thing for somebody that's brand new, especially pre-marriage, pre-kids, all that stuff as well, is take the risks. In hindsight, I wish I would have taken those risks early on. That was coming from the army. I got used to a paycheck. Transitioning into real estate, property management made sense. Corporate America made sense. And don't get me wrong, it was all great for my career. But now, as we switched into owning our own firm, that's a different skill set is learning to run and live off of commission on regular income. It would be much easier if it was just me. I can eat ramen for a week. That's great. But I've got kids and a wife, and that doesn't happen nearly as easy at this
Right.
stage in life as well. So I would say those two things. One, start talking to everybody and play the fact that you're undergrad or you're, master student still in school. And two, take those bigger risks early on, the ones that you can fail, and it's not going to be the end of the world because it's just you impacted before you have a family.
Well, this is must listening for everyone, really. For those that want to reach out to you, work with you, how do they get in contact?
Yeah, the easiest way is I'm all over social media. It's just Will Curtis CCI, all one word on any of the handles that you're out there. And of course, if you go to Cross Sabers Commercial Real Estate or CrossSabersCRE.com, all of our information are on there as well.